Today on the Cutting Edge, we're with Chuck DeVore. Chuck DeVore is probably one of the more interesting people that we've ever met in the political arena. The reason why is we met him back in the 80s, believe it or not, when Chris Cox was our congressman here from the 48th district, and Chuck was one of his aides, one of his able and brilliant aides, by the way, we might add. And we had some dealings with him and with Chris, and it was all very, very good. All came out very, very good. What we discovered was that Chuck DeVore was a dedicated Reagan Republican. Now that's, in this day and age, that's bandied about so much that it almost has lost any meaning for what is truth. So a lot of people that saw pictures of Reagan claim that they were in the Reagan Revolution, but Chuck and Chris Cox, we believe, truly were people that were involved in the process and were actually doing the work. At any rate, this is an interesting show that we're trying to do today because of what Chuck's done. He was elected 4 years ago for the 70th Assembly District in California for state politics. He had a tough go of it, but made it through, and through all of the slings and arrows that came along the way, and has been doing a more than adequate job of representing the 70th district. It's hard to find anyone that doesn't like what Chuck does, which is amazing. Again, in this day and age, you can't find that too often. Well, recently, Chuck has shocked us. Put us into, of course, everything shocks us now. We've got Obama presidency. We've got Sarah Palin trying to run for Robespierre of America. I don't know what she's running for, but it's a crazy situation there. The whole thing is upside down. Our economy's upside down. And on top of this, so Chuck has to step up to the plate in the middle of all this mayhem and do what? Well, he decides to run for the Senate of California against probably one of the more able and one of the more intelligent people in government, and that's Barbara Boxer. That doesn't mean that we like her politics. So we have to give the devil its due for being so bright. She's an extremely bright person, and she's even responsive to her constituents, which is scary. But having said all that, we're going to welcome this wonderful guy who we love very much, Chuck DeVore, to the program. We're going to try to get down into some very serious issues today that you may never hear anywhere else. So let's start off, Chuck, with the classic question: why?
Well, I don't believe that California can afford Barbara Boxer anymore. If you look at her policies and how she really came to prominence in California politics, it really started with the anti-nuclear movement of the 70s, both in opposition to America's desire to defend itself against, at the time, a very aggressive and expansionistic Soviet empire, as well as the use of peaceful commercial nuclear power to generate electricity. The other thing that she really made her effort on was stopping any domestic oil production. She just seems to have this thing about preventing the domestic oil production and wanting us to import more oil from overseas, sending our hard currency earnings to countries, many of whom hate us and some of whom directly fund terrorism. And then lastly, of course, she's never met a tax increase she doesn't like. And so if you look at those things, California today just announced its unemployment numbers for the month of October. We are now up to 8.2% unemployment. We had a 0.5% increase in unemployment. We're tied for the third worst in the nation. I believe, unfortunately, before this economic slowdown gets over, we're likely to see unemployment in California in the mid 9%. And I don't think that we can afford her sorts of policies anymore. Instead of no, let's not have any oil drilling, let's not have any nuclear power, and let's not have tax relief, I think we need the opposite. And I think that'll get Californians working again and contribute to our economy.
Okay, now listen, this is important because what our first thought was when we heard that you were running against Boxer. It wasn't so much that you weren't the better candidate. That had really not much to do with it. What it had to do with was the fact that a guy by the name of Arnold Schwarzenegger will be leaving government on that year, and he might want to run for Barbara Boxer's seat as well.
He may.
Which may mean that you may have to run against Arnold in the primary.
He may.
And as you have mentioned in your fundraising letters that you sent to us, and I'm sure several others, you're looking at $25 million to collect in order to make yourself a viable candidate. And we know that Barbara's going to get help from Obama and doing wonderful work on the web and all these other things to get that grassroots level of participation up in the state of California if she really wants to do it.
Right.
Now, let's step back from this just a tad, and we'll start with the basics. You're in the Assembly of the state of California.
Yes.
How many Republicans are in the Assembly?
Well, after this election, we have 30 Republicans
Out of how
80
many?
in the Assembly. 30 out of 80.
Okay.
Assembly districts in California range between 450 to 500,000 people that we represent. They're the fourth largest legislative jurisdiction in America, after, of course, California Senate seats, then congressional, then the Senate out of Texas, and then California
Okay, now do they
Assembly.
have a filibuster-proof majority?
Well, we don't have a filibuster in the legislature of California, but what we do have is a two-thirds requirement to pass budget and taxes, and the Democrats do not have two-thirds in either house.
So they need at least 10 of your votes?
They need 2 votes in the Senate and 4 votes in the Assembly.
That's it, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, now we just had a word from Governor Schwarzenegger that we're looking, and he's always very conservative about these numbers, by the way. But he says recently $28 billion in deficits are projected for the state of California, and this doesn't count if the fact is that the economy goes down further, foreclosures go on greater, we have a devaluation of real estate values in the state of California. Things could look really bad. I mean, maybe double, right?
Right, although that deficit projection is for 2 fiscal years. It's basically between now and the end of the current fiscal year in June 30th of 2009, and then taking it on from July 1st of 2009 to June 30th of 2010.
Now, what he wants to do recently in today's paper, he wants to triple our car licenses.
Right.
And here's this worst economy in 100 years,
Right.
and we're going to triple our car licenses, which weren't really. They weren't, as John and Ken say, when Gumby was in business, that caused him to lose the election.
Right.
So, and now we're talking about Gray Davis for those people who aren't familiar with that, the salutary term Gumby.
Right.
So, but I'm just mentioning that. So here we are. We're looking at a tremendous deficit.
Yes, we are.
What could we cut back?
Well, I think the important thing to look at is the fact that we have had about 40% growth in government spending since Governor Schwarzenegger was elected. We didn't eliminate one department, not one commission. We didn't cut back anything. Nothing was reformed. We didn't cut up the credit cards like the governor said we were going to do. We didn't blow up the boxes. No reform, no reduction in the growth of spending. If you just went back and spent what government spent 3 years ago, we could balance this budget. That's all it takes. We've just grown so much in the last 5 years. It wouldn't take much to roll it back. Now, the question is, what is the best way to meet the current budgetary deficit gap? It's important for your viewers to know that California has the highest income tax rate in the nation. We have the highest gas tax in the nation. We have the highest sales tax rate in the nation. We have the highest corporate tax in the western United States. And contrary to popular mythology about Proposition 13 and property taxes, our property taxes are actually at the national average. You put all that together, and California has, depending on how you look at it, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th most taxed state in the country.
Now, I got to ask a question here because I'll forget this if I don't ask it now.
Yeah.
Proposition 13 is a big thing with a lot of people.
Yes.
If you talk to people that have property in the state of California, they're going to tell you that their tax assessor is going to add maybe 2 or 3% a year.
That's correct.
Just
2%.
2% a year
Right.
to the value of their property, whether it goes up or not.
Right.
Now, we're just guessing. Now, and this is total guessature, but think this out. If the value of the property in 2006 reverts to the value of the property in 1998
Right.
or before,
Right.
then how in the world can these assessors continue to assess
Well,
this higher rate?
That's of course a local property tax issue, county by county. The way it's supposed to work is, let's say you were lucky enough to buy your property back in 1978 when Prop 13 was passed. Well, you're probably still catching up to the value of that property in 1978 at 2% per year, even with the current devalued cost of your home. If, however, you bought your home 2 years ago, then it is just a simple paperwork drill to apply to reassess the baseline to your assessor and say, look, I may have bought this home for $500,000, but it's now worth $300,000. And they have to take a look at that and reassess your property value at the lower value. So you're not supposed to be paying more property taxes than your house is actually worth.
I'm thinking of places like Stockton where there's a devastation row. I mean, there are just foreclosure after foreclosure after foreclosure, and the few houses that are remaining there, it doesn't seem to be the fair thing to do to be raising their property taxes.
They need to go through their county assessor and ask for a reassessment. That's fairly easy to do, and the assessor is automatically supposed to.
Okay, I'm taking away time from you, and I don't want to do that.
That's all right. Good questions.
But I think it's important for people out there. They want to know these things.
Sure.
Now, okay, so we're in this terrible malaise. And you're stepping up to the plate now to go to the national level.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Going to the national level right now looks like a death wish. I mean, every single, whether it's Citigroup, all the banking people are all on iffiness. Everybody thinks that they're worse than used car salesmen. I mean, I think used car salesmen are in a pretty good spot right now because they know that nobody's buying. So you know what I'm saying? This is really a bad situation for bankers, for companies at large, the big three. So I'm going to kind of step up out of this California malaise for a minute, and let's get into some things that you may differ with Barbara Boxer on, and you also may have some feelings about.
Right.
Let's start with the big one. The big one was the Hank Paulson, Ben Bernanke bailout.
Absolutely.
All right. Now here, I'm just going to give the background for the people that are out there. We had several members of our congressional district in the Congress here in Southern California that voted against the bailout.
Yes.
We had a few that voted for it.
Right.
One was David Dreyer, and another one was John Campbell, our guy right here in the 48th to replace Chris Cox. We tried our best to tell him, don't do this.
Right.
Anyway, tell us what you would have done had you been at the senatorial level.
Well, I actually wrote a piece against the bailout. I'm also opposed to taking taxpayer money to bail out the big three automakers. Let me explain briefly where I think we went wrong with this economic crisis that we find ourselves in. The problem that really started this was the fact that you have two government chartered agencies in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, created by the government, that ended up with loan ratios of about 80 to 100 to 1. In other words, the loans on their books that they bought, the mortgage securities that they purchased, versus the assets backing them, they had about $1 in assets for every $80 to $100 in outstanding loans. Now, as you may recall from our recent campaign, the Republican nominee for president, Senator John McCain, actually was part of a group of Republican senators that tried very hard to get Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to have to come under different rules so that they could no longer have such enormously leveraged investments, and furthermore, that they wouldn't be able to continue to underwrite without any fear of losing their own money these no documentation, no money down loans. And the problem that you got into is that if you, as you may recall, in the late 1990s, under the Clinton administration, the rules of the game were changed because the thought was if we could use government-backed money with this government-chartered agency to get people into homes who could never otherwise afford a mortgage, who just didn't have the credit history, didn't have the job history, didn't have the history of paying their bills on time, and get them into a home, well, you know, that'd be a good thing for America. Home ownership rates, the higher they are, the better it is for America. That's true, but if you put someone into a home who can't reliably make those home payments, or you put them in with a big balloon payment, that's not a good thing for America, as we've recently found out. Now, the problem when you get into that is this concept in government called moral hazard. And what moral hazard is where you basically don't let people suffer from the consequences of their own errors, their own mistakes.
Too big to fail. Too
big
small to fail.
Right. And so if you're a homeowner and you took out a mortgage that was irresponsible and the taxpayers bail you out, well, then that encourages more risky, bad financial behavior in the future. If you run a multi-$100 billion insurance company like AIG and you put a lot of your resources into purchasing these mortgage-backed securities or derivatives
and then reselling them,
absolutely,
and leveraging them up.
And then you get bought out, and the government makes good for your mistake, and you still make your bonuses, and you still get to go down to plush resorts and have your nice meetings. Well, then again, we have moral hazard, because what we've done is we've told not only the individual homeowner but also the business tycoons that failure is not a problem.
Let's get to a point here, though. We have to answer this one for our friend Chris Cox. He was during the presidential campaign. John McCain came out and said, "Fire Chris Cox.
Right.
He's a dirty, rotten scoundrel." Basically, that's what he said.
Right.
Okay.
I know.
Without trepidation, he said.
Right.
I mean, there wasn't any equivocation. Nothing.
That was at the height of the panic, and I think it reflected the fact that by just doing his job and sticking to doing his job, some people were frustrated with former Congressman Cox, chairman of the SEC, for doing his job and not doing anything more than his job. The fact is that the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission has a very limited role in making sure that people are not conducting inappropriate activity with securities that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange.
Our question was right away where was Treasury in this, and where was the Fed in this?
Well,
both of those, that's their money.
Or even more importantly, a couple of years ago, why didn't we change the rules that would have unwound some of this Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac stuff a couple of years ago, when people like John McCain and other Republicans said we have to unwind this, we have to prevent this problem from happening. What happened at the time was that Democrats just went up in an uproar and said, no, we can't do this, because this is our solution for affordable housing. This is how we get people into homes they can afford.
Okay, now we've beaten this thing up quite a bit, Chuck. But let's get to something here and figure out the solution to that.
Right.
And the bottom line is that those days are over. Everybody hates all these people. They're not going to give them the free lunch. I mean, it was just the other day we had the big three automakers come in and flying in their Lear jets and took a serious gaffe from everyone and said, why do you want a handout from us?
Here's what I think we need to do. And the reason why I believe that the bailout and any subsequent bailout is a bad idea is when you look at capital flows around the world, when you look at money going from China to America, when you look at money going from Saudi Arabia to America, these capital flows, the flows of people who are investing money, just swamp the smaller amounts of money. Even though $700 billion sounds like a lot, in the world economy, it's not a lot of money. And so what happens is those flows of capital from the Federal Reserve, from the federal government, are tiny compared to the amount of money sloshing around the world. And so the things that we should do to solve the problem are, number one, we needed to change the mark-to-market regulations. These were the rules that said...
All right, now let's get into that, because that's a very important part of this process. And mark-to-market, a lot of people are eyes glaze over.
Yeah, exactly.
What I say about mark-to-market is this: if you've got a phone card with $5 on it, then that's what it should be worth. $5.
Right.
It shouldn't be worth 10 or 20 or $2.50.
Right.
So
exactly.
That's mark-to-market, isn't that?
So that's a good explanation. What mark-to-market means for these big companies is that they have assets and securities that are tied in with home mortgages. Now, if the underlying value of the home is $500,000 and that mortgage, let's say, is not being paid on, the problem with mark-to-market is there's not a market for that current mortgage device, that current mortgage certificate. No one wants to buy it.
Right.
And so mark-to-market says instead of being worth $500,000, maybe it's worth $50,000, maybe it's worth $25,000. And as a result, you completely destroyed the asset base of some of these companies, making them now way in the red on their balance sheets, which prevented them from borrowing money, from loaning money, etc.
It's a devaluation collapse, basically.
Exactly. So that was problem number one.
Right.
And I understand that there have been temporary rules put in place to try to address that situation. That was very important to do. Now, two more things need to be done to attract capital and new investment to America so we can get Americans working again. And here's where you're going to find a big disagreement between myself and Barbara Boxer. And who knows where the new president-elect is going to come down, because his campaign rhetoric would say he was on the side of Boxer, but he may be going my way on this. And here's the two things I think we need to do. We absolutely have to reduce our tax on capital gains. What capital gains says is that after you've already been taxed for your earnings for your work, then if you save any of your money and make money on that, we're going to tax you at a rate as high or higher than you did when you were working for that money. Now, the problem with that is that there are other countries around the world that have far lower capital gains rates, including zero. And so if you have spare money sitting around that you want to invest, why would you want to invest it in a country that's going to take more of the money that you've saved and wisely invested and made into more money?
Everybody points out this, though. Everyone will point out Exxon and Chevron and Mobil. They're going to say, you know, these are the guys that are going to make all the money if you take down the capital gains tax and you remove it down.
Right.
It's not Joe. It's not Joe the unplumber.
Let me make it even worse for you, because
right.
I'm going to say my second thing, and then that's even just as applicable to what you just said.
Exactly.
The other thing we need to do is reduce our taxes on business in America.
Right.
And I'll get to your point here in a second. America has the second highest corporate tax rate in the world. You know which country has the highest? Japan.
Right.
It hasn't really worked out for them all that well in the last 10 years now, has it? They've been having a terrible economy for the last 10 years because their business can't attract investment and get going. Now, does it help Exxon and these other big companies? Of course it does. But let's think about something for a moment. Is a company an entity by itself? I mean, do you care if Exxon or Ford or GM makes a lot of money? Where does that money go? It's with a company. Until it gets dispersed to a person in terms of pay and benefits, at that point, of course, we tax people, we tax the executives, we tax the managers, we tax the workers on the assembly line, right?
Right.
And so when a company makes a lot of profit, what does it do with its profit? Well, some of the profit gets distributed in dividends to stockholders, a lot of which, by the way, go to people's 401ks and IRAs and other pension and retirement funds.
Other goes to the price of the stock.
And some of the money gets put into investment so that they can upgrade, in the case of General Motors, their assembly line. They can make better products. They can do more research and development.
All right, so let's not argue that, because we've got you. We got your point there, and I think everybody else does. The issue, there's an interesting thing that you several years ago, and you'll give me the year that this happened, but you wrote a book with Bill Gertz, and it was called China Threat.
It was actually China Attacks.
China
with
Attacks.
Stephen Mosier. Bill Gertz wrote the China Threat right around the same time.
All right. Okay.
So,
thanks
close.
for clearing that up. Okay. At any rate, you had a serious trepidation about the Chinese government at that time and what they were doing and what they were taking away from technology in this country and a variety of other things. Well, you know, things change overnight, and here we are. We've got General Motors and Ford and Rise are all building cars and every other thing in the world over in China. We've got, what's going on with your position on China as opposed to what with Barbara Boxer might want to do?
Well, this is one of those areas where you actually find a little bit of agreement between the two of us. What you typically find on the question of China is that the conservatives in the Republican Party and the liberals in the Democrat Party are both concerned about human rights abuses in China. The conservatives, of course, with the Republican Party are a little more concerned about the military development and the economic development in China, whereas I would say that the liberals are probably more concerned about the human rights abuses. It tends to be the moderates of both parties that don't even like to look at that and view China as simply a benign trading partner that we need to do more business with. Now, I view China not as a communist power these days, even though they are run by the Chinese Communist Party. It's a one-party state. I think that they're really more akin to a fascist or a national socialist power like Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Germany circa 1937. They are a country that has a somewhat free economy, but it is directed by the one-party state to the ends of the Chinese Communist Party. They brook no dissent. If you criticize them, they will arrest you. You'll disappear. You'll go to a labor camp. They actually do still have slave labor camps in China. They're called laogai. That's where they put their political prisoners, their religious prisoners, and often work these individuals to death. And some of those products, by the way, do find their way to America. There was an interesting controversy just about a year or two ago where paper clips that were made in America were being made by these women who had been arrested for prostitution and had been put into like a labor re-education camp under really deplorable conditions where they were assembling these paper clips with their fingers, and their fingers were all bloody and messed up. Just terrible conditions. And that's fairly common in China. The thing that very much concerns me about China is that by some estimates, if you go to the CIA World Factbook and you look at what's called purchasing power parity, where they actually look at the value of the currency and the cost of living in a country, and they can kind of come up with an idea of their gross domestic product equivalent, what you'll see is that China now, by the CIA's estimate, is close to half of the U.S. economy, close to half of our economic output, which actually would make them the second largest economy in the world. And that makes a certain amount of sense, because actually last year in 2007, China actually surpassed America as a global greenhouse gas emissions emitter. They actually are emitting more global greenhouse gases in China than they do in America. And that stands to reason. They're the world's #1 producer of steel, #1 producer of cement. A lot of industrial activity going on in China.
And they're crying this year because their growth estimates are going from 9 or 10 to 7 or 8.
Yeah, or maybe a little lower.
Yeah.
But still, even at 5%, it's still more than double what we have going here.
It wouldn't take long at that rate, though, however, to surpass our economy.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the thing that concerns me from a geostrategic standpoint is if you look at the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, by some economic estimates, they had 110% of our population, so a little bit more population than us, about half of our economic output, a little more than half of our economic output. And so if you looked at their per capita output, they're about half of what America had at the height of the Cold War, right around 1981-82, before they started really going downhill. Now, China has about half of our economic output, but they have 5 times as many people.
Right.
5 times as many people. And so that means that their per capita output, the amount of goods and services that they make per individual in China, is roughly 1/10 of what it is here in America. And I like to ask the question of people and say, okay, do you believe that the Chinese as a culture, given their long history with capitalism and trade, more so than the Russian people, especially given how much the Communist Party in Russia just completely throttled and destroyed any entrepreneurial push, beginning with the revolution in 1917. Don't you think that the Chinese people are capable of economic output at least equal to the old Soviet Union in 1981-82, right, as a percentage of America? Meaning half of America's economic output per capita.
Right.
Well, if you agree with me that that's possible, then that would mean that China, with 5 times as many people, would have an economy 2.5 times larger than America's economy. Now, the last time America fought a nation with a bigger economy than ours was the War of 1812. And that didn't work out so well for us. I mean,
No,
thank goodness for Andrew Jackson and defeating the British at New Orleans on the eve of the, in fact, as the peace treaty was
being signed,
consummated on the continent. But the fact is that the White House was burned down, and we got our national anthem from that. At least, but it was a tough war.
Let me jump in here now on this issue of world trade and the fact that this idea of free trade is kind of having a little bloom off the rose here because of the fact that we have now a president that says he wants to reward people that stay and cause manufacturing jobs to occur in this country rather than overseas. That's number one. Number two, involved in that same question, is the fact that we have falling oil prices that are terrific. It's great because it saves a lot of, how it affects us is that we went to the local restaurant and they said that it was the first time in 2 weeks that they'd had people come out because of the fact that the oil prices were going evidently lower enough so that people can actually, it won't take food out of their mouth to put it in the gas tank.
Big difference between $2.25 a gallon and $4.50 a gallon.
You betcha. So I guess the question to you is, this is dreadfully affecting people like the guy from Venezuela. What's his name?
Hugo Chavez.
Yeah, Hugo Chavez. It's affecting Putin and the Russian economy.
Yes.
It's affecting even the Chinese economy, because the Chinese are big producers of oil, and nobody tells you much about that either. So, I mean, we're all of these people that are oil-producing countries, including ourselves, are now having to take less and drill more. During the election, I hate to make this big, hard transition, but I'm coming up to a break. So I'm going to make this transition right here, and then we're going to stop, and then you can answer all those questions. But during the election, it was McCain said, "Drill, drill, drill, baby," and so did Sarah Palin.
Right.
And now we're looking at maybe $1.75 for gas, or $1.65 for gas a gallon. So put those things in the back of your mind. I'm going to put us into a hard break right now, and we'll be back with all those answers.
All right.
We're back with Chuck DeVore, and Chuck is an interesting guy in that he served. Are you still serving with the military?
I retired last year as Lieutenant Colonel.
Lieutenant Colonel Army. Oh man, we love the Army guys. Anyway, so it was you spent how many years doing that?
A little over 24.
Wow, cool. Anyway, thank you. Good job.
Well, thank you for your service.
Well, we're just glad we got back home all in one piece. That's enough. That's enough grateful appreciation that we need. Anyway, we asked you a bunch of serious questions about the economy,
yes,
about world global events, and so if you got some ideas on these things, let's go.
Well, you had two kind of broad questions: the impact of the price of oil, and the kind of the political push during a few months during the summer to increase domestic oil production. And then the second question, which was about kind of the direction that free trade might be going under the new administration. Let's deal with the second one first. Free trade often gets a very bad rap from people because the natural inclination of most nations is to be protectionist, to have mercantilist policies that put in trade barriers. Now, let me be very clear about this, that when you put in a trade barrier, what you're doing is you're taxing imports. So you're actually increasing taxes on people and making goods more expensive to purchase.
Now let's use that right there. I'm just going to use it as an example right there, because I need to set an example for people. What you're saying is intellectually perfection, but I've got to tell people that what we're talking about here is if you've got a corn farmer,
right,
from Iowa,
yes,
and he's making a lot of corn every year,
right,
and if by having imports come from the foreign countries with more corn, it lowers the price because there's more product. Right. So what we do is by putting in a tariff, we say to the people that are out of the country that are not here, if you want to bring corn into the country and compete with our corn farmer in Iowa, then what you're going to have to do is pay a tax.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that.
What that does, though, is history has shown when you put in tariffs, what that does, first of all, is it operates like a tax on the consumer. Secondly, it discourages innovation and free market competition, so that corn farmer, rather than innovate and try to get his costs down, basically lives fat and happy doing the same old on your nickel because you're paying him more for his corn. Similarly,
and exactly the same. I'm going to interrupt you here for another big transition.
Right.
Automobiles, foreign automobiles, European cars. That we did that too for many years until I don't know when that changed. But then before BMW and Mercedes and Volkswagen came to this country, but there were a lot of trade barriers that we had in place.
And as a result, you saw the product from Detroit become non-competitive and non-innovative because the rest of the world was competing with each other, and we didn't have a level playing field here in America. So the important thing to understand, first and foremost, is that trade barriers are a tax. Secondly, that other countries then retaliate and they raise their own trade barriers, thus making U.S. products more difficult to export. the whole theory behind free trade is that some countries are naturally going to produce certain things better, higher quality, and for less money than other countries do. America, for example, is the world leader in aerospace products and things that go into orbit, communication satellites. We're the world leader in agricultural products. And whenever we have a truly fair reciprocal trade agreement with another country, what ends up happening is our consumers benefit by getting products at higher quality products at a lower cost from another country, and the consumers in the other country benefit by getting higher quality, lower cost products from us.
One thing here again, though, the big issue was during the Clinton administration, all the way back, was the fact that let's do apples and apples. In other words, if you're going to lower, if we're going to lower our trade goods for automobiles from Europe, then they should do the reciprocal thing and lower it for them. But they don't do that.
Well, they sometimes do, and they sometimes don't. For example, in Europe, it's not uncommon for the government to give low interest or no interest loans to industry to allow them to upgrade and essentially be an unfair government subsidy. Of course,
now Airbus 380 is a good example.
Of course, now Europe can say the same thing about us with what we're proposing to do with the big three automakers. Okay?
Correct.
So, look, the bottom line is we need to resist the temptation to somehow think that engaging in a trade war with our trading partners is going to help. Everybody loses with a trade war. Look at what happened during the eve of the Great Depression with the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which devastated world trade with America, deepened the big recession into a long, deep depression. That was one of the reasons why we had that depression, the Great Depression. The other, of course, was the big tax increases enacted both under Hoover and under Roosevelt, as well as all the government experimentation and intervention.
Aren't there any industries in this country that are worth putting protectionist policies for? In other words, why does it have to be across the board? Why does it have to be open up?
Here's the challenge with that. Whenever you step forward and say one industry, then the next industry is going to demand protection, and then the next industry, and the next industry, and before you know it, you don't have free trade. Let me get to the thing that we should be doing, and this gets to your other point, though, about our trading partners and about the growth of China, etc. Clearly, the growth of China is troublesome for American national security. I would like to see the countries on China's periphery do better economically so that they could have more professional and better militaries. Countries like India, even Vietnam, South Korea, Japan. That way, China is not going to feel as free to give us a hard time if they have large, economically vibrant democracies on their periphery. Now, it's important to note, just a couple of days ago, I mean, I don't know whether you saw the news last night. I think it's the 21st, that this interview is occurring on the 21st of November. On the evening of the 20th, it was announced that there was a massive cyber attack occurring against the Pentagon. We know where that cyber attack is coming from. It's coming from China. Okay, they are probing our electronic defenses. They are really looking to assume world leadership on this planet within a couple of decades, if not sooner. Now, how do we deal with that? How do we transcend the Chinese threat and do ourselves a favor? We go back to the issue of capital gains and corporate tax rates, as well as regulatory structures. We need to free America's natural inclination to innovate and to prosper, to grow our economy. And the way you do that is by making it overwhelmingly powerful for other countries to decide that any money that they have that they want to invest, they should invest in America, because we have the best rule of law, the best political stability, our workers are the most productive, so you should invest your money here. Now, what does that give us? Well, what America needs to do in short order is we can no longer be satisfied with long-term annual growth rates of 2 to 3%. We need to kick our economy into high gear and have long-term annual growth rates of 5 to 6%. And why do we have to do that? It isn't just because more growth is better. Let me explain very clearly why we need to do this. We need to have 5 to 6% annualized growth, doing things like investing in automation so we can rebuild our manufacturing industry and compete with the Chinese on their own in their own terms. We need that because we have an $86 trillion unfunded mandate for Social Security and Medicare. Let me say that again. 86 trillion with a T dollars unfunded mandate for Social Security and Medicare. I can't emphasize this enough to your viewers. We cannot pay that. I'm 46 years old. Let me, for anyone younger than me, they're not going to get their Social Security or their Medicare, not unless we monetize the debt and have enormously expensive hyperinflation so that you make your retirement fund worth nothing, or extend the retirement age to be even older than it is. And that's not fair either, because if you look at demographics, there are Americans who, just from a demographic standpoint, aren't likely to live much beyond retirement age. So how is it fair to the different demographic groups who tend to not live as long as other groups if we extend the retirement age? So I don't see Congress doing that. The bottom line is the only way that we can actually pay and make good on our obligation to future generations for Social Security and Medicare is if we double America's growth rate. And the only way we can do that is if we get away from class warfare, we get away from these envious attacks on companies and on capital, and we say, we welcome your capital, we welcome your investment, and then we have regulatory rules that say, that honor economic growth. We have to automate. We have to get more automated manufacturing in this country. We need more energy as the result. We need more, in my opinion, nuclear power, which is the greatest source of reliable, low CO2 emission energy that there has yet been invented. And we have to get moving on that now if we're going to turn this economy around.
We only ask one question here. What happened to our middle class, and how by electing you as our senator, are we going to keep the middle class? How are we going to find jobs that pay right now in today's market, $60,000, $80,000 a year? Where are those jobs, and where do they come from?
Well, that's why we need to bring back some of our manufacturing base, and you're not going to do that by playing the same game the Chinese do by paying a worker, $2 a day to work in some horrific factory
But
condition.
we're competing against those people.
And you can do that with massive automation. Now, obviously, instead of 1,000 people in a Chinese plant turning out a product, you may have 50 Americans turning out a far better product through automation. But the point is that those sorts of jobs will be precisely the solid middle class jobs that we need. Now, the other important point to understand is that one of the reasons why there's less middle class today is that more people got wealthy. And that's actually a good thing. If you look at the distribution of wealth along the curve, you'll see that the poor among us as Americans are about the same as they always have been, maybe a little less. The middle class is a little smaller, but the upper class is bigger. That's a good thing, but it's not a good thing that we have shed so many manufacturing jobs that for some individuals for whom that's what they would like to do, we don't really have an opportunity for them. And you really see that here in California, where our tax policies and our environmental policies and our regulatory environment has caused a massive exodus of manufacturing jobs to states that have lower cost energy, lower labor costs, and less of a regulatory burden. And that's a tragedy for the California middle class.
One of the things that I'm going to mention, though, we're running out of time here, but I do have to mention this. There's a demise here of world economies. We're talking, and you mentioned $86 trillion in Social Security benefits and Medicare, what have you. We're talking just in those subprime mortgages. We were talking $63 trillion. That as just paper that they could, that would make the Weimar Republic look like valuable stuff. So the bottom line is that that we're looking at a world economy that's crumbling. The English are in trouble. The French are in trouble. The Germans are in trouble. Everybody's in trouble. And as this thing falls down further and further, how can we as a country become not competitive, but very aggressively going forward if we don't have, and here's the big thing that everybody's concerned about. You're talking about the big three and why we shouldn't fund them. All right. We we don't know that this is true, and probably not, but they're saying 2 to 3 million jobs are at stake if you do not fund the bailout of the big three. But my question to you is, and why no one will answer it, is we have had turbine and now nanotechnology, where
Sure.
you can make smaller power plants
Absolutely.
that would make 150
Right.
miles to the gallon for gasoline for cars that are the same size as they are today. Why aren't they doing that?
Look, the free market, by its very nature, has a creative destruction to it. And by that I mean, when you invent a new technology that's transformative, it destroys the previous technology. I mean, look at the horse and buggy and how
That's true.
a mass-produced, high-quality Model T wiped out not only the horse and buggy industry, but the buggy whip industry. And naturally, they wanted protection. They didn't get it, and they died. Now, I'm not suggesting that the big three are going to go the way of the horse and buggy, but let's understand what bankruptcy means. If, let's say, Chrysler went bankrupt, does that mean that overnight all of the physical plant disappears? Of course not. It's still there. All the assembly lines, all the machinery, it's still there. What it means is there may be some value wiped out with that with the stock. There may be some difficulty with the people who hold the corporate paper, but that's what the free market economy is supposed to be about. You're supposed to reward success and punish failure. And when the government steps in and removes the consequences of failure, removes the risk, then you are really messing with the underpinning of the free market economy, which must have both sides of the equation. You've got to have rewarding of success, and you have to have punishing of failure.
So this is what Hank Paulson has done. He's rewarded all these guys with the big investment
And
banks, and
absolutely.
they're like little Pac-Man running
Right.
around picking up new banks and doing the same
that's why
thing.
I opposed that bailout, and I opposed the bailout for the big three, and I opposed the AIG bailout. Look, when the economy goes sour, people who overextended themselves and made bad decisions that they could cover over when the economy was going really well, they're going to have to pay a price. And we're seeing that now, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the economy to work its way out and to reward success and to punish failure. And so I think lost in the discussion of all of this, though, is going back to some of the things we said at the very beginning, which is that if you look at the cash flows in the world today, if you look at the value of the U.S. economy, these interventions by our federal government are tiny compared to the cash flows into the value of the overall economy in the world. What we really need to do is deal with the underlying issues, the mark-to-market problem that we mentioned, the issue of moral hazard with things like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac funding mortgages they shouldn't be funding, and then lastly, the tax on capital and the tax on business. If we were to reduce those and attract investment, not only from other countries, but even here in America, where people have non-performing investments, they may be sitting on their money because things look uncertain, we need to get all that money to work so that we can invest and create new industries and new jobs and things that are going to really be leading the world into the future. For example, like using nanotechnology on some of our transportation challenges, as you just mentioned.
Okay, last question, and this is it, and very important. What happened to the Republican Party?
Oh my. I think what happened to the Republican Party is what often happens to parties when they have power for too long and they forget their founding principles. When they forget the things that people expect them to do. You know, people expect Democrats to try to grow government and raise taxes. That's what they're known for. Well, people expect Republicans to try to keep taxes low and to restrain government spending. Now, to his credit, President Bush got the tax cut part right. He made some good Supreme Court and other federal court appointments.
True.
But beyond that, he has a very mixed record. And most importantly, he never vetoed a spending bill in his 8 years as president. He didn't challenge Congress's profligate spending. And yes, Republicans had control of the Congress for 6 of the 8 years of the Bush presidency. And look at the enormous increases in federal spending that they put through. Now, the Democrats are trying to spend even more. But people expect that. They're Democrats. You expect Democrats to expand government at the expense of individual liberty and freedom.
Let me ask this question. I'm going to let you go, but I got to know this. There are a variety of personalities out there that all want to be in charge of the Republican Party, the leftovers,
yes,
okay?
Yes.
Newt Gingrich
Yes.
and Bob Barr and a whole raft of these
Yes.
other guys, okay? Who do you, out of all of these group of people, who do you suggest should be the next guy in charge?
Well, I think if
the Republican Party?
I think if you were to separate out, because I don't know much about his personality today, and I know that like all humans, he's had flaws and mistakes in the past. But from a purely philosophical standpoint and from a purely innovation and ability to articulate it standpoint, I'd have to say Newt Gingrich is one of my favorites, just because he gets it right so often and he knows how to articulate it in a way that makes sense.
But he's right in bed with the Clintons. He's in the same group with, I mean, they're buddy.
Yeah, well, I think that's the old baby boom thing. I don't know how much of that is just the respect that you
Don't
have.
we need a loyal opposition kind of guy? A guy that's going to stand up there and say, you know what,
I think
they
you
did
see
this
that.
good and they did that good, but yes, this is terrible.
I think you do see that from Newt. I think from what I've seen of him on TV, he goes after the other side pretty aggressively. I don't deny that he may have developed a certain personal warmth with his former foe, but I haven't ever seen him back off on criticism because of that.
Well, let me tell you something. To end this conversation, and we don't want to do that, but I got to tell you, it's been a joy to be with you. Thank you so much for your time and effort. And you're going to be on. This is the cutting edge, and it doesn't get any better than this. We will challenge you every way we can, and we did. And good grief, great answers to the questions, and we wish you all good luck in the primary and also in the general election if you can make it that far, and we will be supporting you as one of the loyal people doing that.
Thank you very much.
And thanks a lot for joining us on the Cutting Edge, Chuck. Real good. And by the way, before we go, where's your email address and your
my website is www.chuckdevore.com.
All right.
If you want to learn more about nuclear power, go to my www.powerforcalifornia.com site. And anyone can reach me if they wish at chuck@chuckdevore.com.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And we're with Matt Cunningham of the Red County blog here in Orange County, which is renowned. Is a great blog spot for the Republican Party. Partisan in every regard. At any rate, the reason why we asked Matt here today was for a specific reason, and that is that Chuck DeVore is running for Senate against Barbara Boxer. He filed papers here recently and threw his hat into the ring maybe a week ago, is it? Something like that. And being that you're sort of like on the edge there for the Republican Party, which has kind of been in disarray after this last election, I thought we'd get some feedback from you, Matt, on what you think about all that.
Well, I think Chuck has an uphill climb, obviously. Anytime you're trying to take on a three-term incumbent in any state, it's very difficult. I mean, people are just in the habit of voting for her, and she's been on the ballot 3 times and won 3 times. Chuck is a Zimmerman who's not really known outside of his district. That said, who would have said 2 years ago Barack Obama would be president of the United States, or president-elect of the United States? So it's not an impossible challenge. I think Chuck has to do certain things to communicate his message and also try to drive home to voters Barbara Boxer's weaknesses.
Well, I guess the question is, you need $25 million, and that's not big money in this day and age, evidently. But it used to be a lot of money.
You're right.
But now it's not so much big money compared to the way it was before. But what happens if Arnold runs against him?
Well, I think in a closed primary, I think Arnold would be hard put to win, frankly. And Arnold obviously would have a greater fundraising advantage over Chuck in terms of his own ability to put his personal fortune into the race. But Arnold's very unpopular with a lot of Republicans, especially in a closed primary system like we have,
right? And
where conservatives tend to be at an advantage. How is Arnold going to run on his record? I mean, Arnold would be running on basically a Democratic record. I think Chuck would do very well in that circumstance. I think.
Well, what's the scuttlebutt? Is Arnold going to run or no?
I don't think so. I think one indicator might be if there's a special election, like as there probably will be in 2009, and if Arnold attempts to qualify or have put on an open primary on that ballot, I think that would be a signal that Arnold intends to run for a Republican nomination in the future, because I think he understands that in a closed primary system he would have a hard time. Look at.
Right.
he really only got elected governor because he ran in a recall situation in which he could bypass that whole primary process.
Right.
So I think that would be an indication. If he doesn't do that, I don't think Arnold really is going to have much interest in going to Washington. He probably would be more apt to want to finish out his time in office. And if he does see himself with a future in politics, angle for a spot in the Obama administration.
One of the questions that we asked Chuck was, we're talking to Chuck and saying, well, what do you think's going to happen now with the Republican Party, and one of the things that we discussed in pretty specific detail was the bailout, and how we had two different camps here in Orange County. One was, I think Ed Royce voted against it, Dana Rohrabacher voted against it. That people like Dreyer and Campbell both voted for it. So what was the fallout from the bailout issue about what people thought in this recent election?
Well, the bailout is not popular with voters, and I think I understand. I think it's an issue on which reasonable people can disagree, but I think in retrospect, it's opened the door for future bailouts. I mean, and I think it's pointed out the folly of government intervention in the marketplace like that. Now you have healthy companies like American Express charging themselves as banks so they can get in line to get bailout money. Because why not?
Right.
I mean, they get a few $1 billion in liquidity to stash away in case times get tough. Now the automobile manufacturers are going to Washington hat in hand. If they get their bailout, I think you can see any large industry with a lot of lobbying clout is going to, when they encounter hard times, is going to go to Washington and ask for a bailout.
That's what's so funny, because here's Campbell. He's tied to the car industry anyway, and now he's going to be supporting. Not only did he support the biggest bailout and earmark package in American history, but now he's going to support the bailout of the three automakers.
Oh, I don't know if he is or not. I haven't followed.
It'd be real interesting to find out where his position is on that.
My guess would be that John does not. I think he and other Republicans viewed the financial bailout as sort of an exception, and maybe it was a triumph of hope over experience that somehow the government can manage in, do it surgically, and get out, as opposed to it just opens the door for further government intervention in the economy. And I think that's the fear that might happen.
You know what was upsetting about that, man? I have to bring this up. When the truth came out about the subprime meltdown and the globalization of the debt, we're talking about $63 trillion that they were trying to cover up with 700 or 850 billion, which is an impossible task to begin with. So that's the reason why Paulson all of a sudden flips over and says, well, no, now we're not going to do that. We're going to give it to the banking people who are out there like little Pac-Man buying up all of the little banking industry.
And I don't think the package would have sold. It would have passed if they'd been voting on a bailout for the banks like that. I don't think it would have passed the House.
Exactly.
It was one thing to make a case that, okay, we're in an extraordinary situation. We need to soak up these bad mortgages somehow so that the credit market can function again. And that's, you can make a reasonable case for that, but that's obviously not how it's turned out. And again, these government interventions in the marketplace can sound good on paper.